Maggie Gyllenhaal, how are you?
Hi.
Welcome to
Good.
Q. It's nice to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
So, a poem is at the heart of this film. You play a kindergarten teacher, hence the name, aspiring poet, and one of your students says these words out of the blue, and that's kind of the moment that sets the whole story into play, which it goes, Anna is beautiful, beautiful enough for me. Do you remember the rest of it? Do you?
The sun hits her yellow house. It's almost like a gift from God.
Like a sign
Like a
from
sign
God.
from God.
That's something else, eh?
Yeah.
There's something, I think, just something about watching a child say a poem, or even just actually hearing us say a poem, reminds me of how strange it can be, just and how little we hear poetry in our daily lives. You know what I mean?
I think that's true. But I think children live in a kind of a poetic world. I think that's part of what's interesting about the movie is, yes, this child, there's sort of two ways to look at it. Either that this child has some kind of gift and, out of him comes these fully formed poems, or, which is kind of more the way I look at it, that, it's about a woman who's a poet, whose poetry isn't heard and certainly not appreciated, who interprets what she's seeing coming out of a child as poems. Because
Right.
she needs them to be poems, because
Right.
because she's starving.
Right. Okay, I've read an interview with the director, and she said that one of the poems, not that one, but one of the poems was actually, I think, from a 5-year-old, like the 5-year-old child of a friend of hers, or
Yeah,
something like
there
that.
was one that was written by a 5-year-old, and the other two were written by, the other few were written by Ocean Vuong and Kaveh Akbar, who are like stars
Poets.
right now in the poetic world. And then Lisa's poetry is written by Dominique Townsend, who's also a really brilliant published poet.
But he had the challenge of writing poems that wouldn't carry as well as the other poems, I suppose.
I don't know. I think that's Dominique is a woman. She had the challenge. But
Right.
I think no. I think the movie is much more painful if Lisa's poetry is also compelling and worthwhile. If her poetry
Right.
is like not that good, it's easier to write her off. If she's writing poetry that's really interesting and still nobody's hearing her, well, then you have a really complicated movie.
But the character doesn't believe in them. You don't get the feeling that Lisa believes in her own
Oh, I
poems.
totally disagree.
Really?
Oh, yeah. I think if you see the movie, the movie opens really early on. She reads a poem of hers and almost cries with her husband at the table as she's reading it. And then she reads a poem of hers to the little boy in the bathroom deep into the movie. And it's like as if, she's expressing what's most deeply inside her. I mean, I think the movie, well, let me say, it's so interesting. I mean, it's about so many things.
Yeah.
I'm so proud of this movie. But I do think it's about the real consequences of what happens if you starve a vibrant woman's mind.
What do you mean?
Well, I think the movie is about watching what happens if a woman isn't fed. And I think so many women right now are waking up to the feeling that we've been starving, that we've been accepting so many things, bending over backwards, twisting ourselves into pretzels to get the things that we need to survive, and that it's not okay.
Right.
And so I think this is a movie about that, made by a group of women filmmakers. And so I think our conclusion in the movie is like, well, what happens when you starve a vibrant woman's mind is dire, And I also think, in a way, well, okay, so how do you tell that story? I keep thinking about this interview I did with Trevor Noah.
From The Daily Show.
Yeah. It was about The Deuce, but he'd seen the trailer for The Kindergarten Teacher. And
Right.
so he was asking me about it, and he was like, so is it a horror movie?
Yeah.
Is it a thriller?
Yeah.
Is it an intimate movie about a woman's mind?
Yeah.
And I think I loved that he said that, because the truth is it's none of those things and all of those things. It's even like kind of funny sometimes. It's a new form. And I think it's partially new because it's feminine. It's coming from a feminine place.
What do you think the film says about the value we put on art as a society?
Well, I think one of the things that's compelling to me is like, well, who decides? Who decides what's valuable? Who decides that Lisa's poetry is less valuable than the poetry of this little boy?
I felt like the class did, or an audience would.
Well, the teacher did.
Yeah.
And maybe a culture does, you know. And I think that's really interesting.
Right. But I think also it's interesting to think about the value that she places on art herself. That there are people like the young boy's father. I know I'm getting into the weeds in the film here, but he can say whatever he wants. I want him to live a normal life. I want him to be able to make money. I want him to be able to live.
Yeah.
Her children. I want them to be kind of one's going to be a Marine, going to be a normal person.
Sure.
Yet she doesn't seem to feel understood. She seems to feel almost left out of everything because they don't understand the value of her art to her, or the value of art at all.
Right. Yeah. And then she sort of thinks, oh, this boy understands.
Yeah.
And so, but like, it's very disturbing to see this grown woman go, this child understands the value of art. This child understands me. This child is the way that I'm going to be able to do something worthwhile in the world. Like, it starts to get scary to watch the movie because this woman who originally you think, like, she's this great teacher. She's lovely. She's curious. She's a poet. She's like got these, she's friendly. And then you watch her get really confused and kind of go, the only person that really understands me in this world is this 5-year-old boy.
Right.
And instead of the way it's supposed to go, where a grown-up feeds a child, which is what I think she thinks that's what she's doing.
Yeah, she thinks she's being like the court for Mozart.
Exactly.
Massaging Mozart's hands.
Exactly.
After to encourage brilliance from Mozart.
Totally. But instead, I think what's really happening is she's sucking off of him.
But I think maybe the question I had was, why is it so important to her? Why is art that important to her? And listen, I say that as someone who hosts a show about art, who makes art for a living outside of this. And I say this to someone who's been surrounded by art since they were born.
Right. Well, I think it isn't important to everybody. But I think for me, it's a way of making a connection with the rest of the world. I think it's also like, why play Lisa? Why play, a sex worker and the deuce? And, why? Because I think it's a way of like bringing humanity to people who it's easy to judge, like kind of challenging or massaging a kind of empathy out of other people and out of myself too. Like, imagine if you heard on the local news station the story of what happens in this movie, which I won't say, because hopefully you'll go see it and live through the story of it. But imagine if you can imagine, having seen the movie, that this story could be on your local news station, and you think, God, how could that have happened?
Mm.
And so this is an imagining of how it could have happened and how you could even possibly, for a long, long time, have been rooting for her. So
what do you do as an actor? I mean, I think even if people don't, again, we can't, it's really hard to talk about this film because...
You don't want to give anything away.
But so far we've given a little bit away. Like, I think we've said that, this is obviously a kindergarten teacher who's obsessed with the poetry of a student in her class.
Right, and you want people to know, I think, like, it's not like about a kindergarten teacher who is,
It's
like,
not kindergarten cop.
Right.
Yeah,
it's
what I mean?
There's definitely a dark side. It's the kindergarten teacher with me in it.
So with you in it, how do you put yourself in the headspace to play this character? Because she does things in this film that makes audiences really uncomfortable. She's not a monster. She crosses a lot of lines. What do you do?
Well, I guess intellectually, Sarah Colangelo, the director, and I think we both really knew, and it was very clear in the script, the movie doesn't work unless you really deeply relate to her. You know, if you start this movie and you're like, oh, she's a creepy teacher, well, then what is it? So she has to feel like one of us. So that was important. So I knew, okay, she's got to be a great teacher. I spent some time in a kindergarten class.
I read about that.
Learning really the stuff, those little special things that the kindergarten teachers do.
Like
I mean,
what?
amazing stuff. I mean, like what? Like one thing I loved, which I've seen my own daughter do, who actually is the same age as Parker, who plays Jimmy, is, you know, a kindergarten teacher, someone raises their hand and says something like, this weekend was Passover and we had a Passover Seder, and all the kids raised their hands. Yeah, me too.
Right.
But she had set this thing up where they were on the radio, they did this little hand
This
sign.
is like is this the hang?
It sort of is.
Hang 10, isn't
It's
that one?
Sort of like the hang loose sign.
You know what like surfers do with the pinky and the thumb out?
Yeah.
I want to point out that's what me and Maggie Gyllenhaal are doing in the studio to one another
I
right
think
now.
That's
yeah,
what,
right.
I think that's what it was. And all the kids instead raised their hand and went like that. And that meant me too. And then they didn't have to all scream out.
Oh, yeah,
so
me
you
too,
just
me
see
too.
all the kids doing that. Or sometimes they would take their hand and put it on their head and say, brain match. I didn't know exactly what that meant. I had to check in, but it meant something similar. I have something I'd like to share or whatever.
Right,
so
right.
all those kind of great kindergarten teacher tricks. So I knew she had to be great. I thought she also had to be a great poet. And then beyond that, what was the question? Like, how do I
No, I want to talk more about
construct
that.
it.
Did you teach the class?
Well, yeah. So we had we shot very, very quickly. You know, a movie about a woman made by a group of women. We didn't surprisingly have enough money,
Right.
so we were like running and gunning. It was like really independent film
Right.
at its classic,
Yeah.
at its classic best. So we had 5 days with the kids, and Sarah and I talked about it, and we thought. I don't believe children who are 5 and 6 years old are actors. And I don't believe it's fair to ask them to act. And I think when you do, you get something really strange.
Yeah.
And we wanted real kids behaving like kids. So, yes, I would just kind of teach the class. You know, if you're watching in the movie, there's a painting class. The kids are really painting. And when they're that age, you're not going to sort of be like, pretend to paint.
No, right.
You know? So they're deeply engaged in their projects. When we're doing the stuff where I'm teaching them the letters, you know, they're really in there going like, either figuring out the letter or saying, I'm really in first grade, so I know all my letters.
Right.
And or the songs we sang. Actually, I had one of the only actual arguments I had with one of the producers was I just started singing this song, which I knew was in public domain.
Was it like a happy birthday? What was it?
It was like set down in the valley,
oh ho, the rattling bog, the bog down in the valley, rare. But how do you know that song?
Everyone knows that song.
Oh, cool.
But she's Israeli and she didn't know that it was in the public domain.
Oh, cool. We sing that. We sing that a lot in Newfoundland. We sing that where I'm from. It speeds up as it goes along.
Yes, and you add on.
In that hole, there was a tree, a rare tree, a rattling tree, and branch in the tree, and the tree in the hole, and the hole in the bog.
And you can say whatever you want.
We're getting into the weeds on the bog down in the valley here. I know we are.
And of kindergarten, deep into kindergarten. So I just started singing that song with the kids, and the kids all knew it, and the kids then are super engaged, and they're excited to say, you know, whatever funny things, you know, a fly on the bottom, and whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so that's really exciting to watch on film, the kids behaving. And then there was this kind of double job of I would see the DP who often would sort of stay wide and make the children feel comfortable first, then go in to try to grab the narrative pieces we needed, and I'd have to sort of go over, be off camera for the kids, feed them their lines, make it, so that we could capture what we need to capture, which was cool too in terms of playing the part because, I'm playing somebody who is, like I said, is not fed, is just, the children, her family, everything is just sort of taking from her. And so to then have the kids be on top of acting in every scene and, being one of the producers on the movie, to have the kids be asking me if they needed to go to the bathroom or if they needed a snack, or it just fed into the feeling of,
You were Miss Spinelli to them?
Miss Spinelli, and also, the feeling of so many people pulling on you.
Right. But you were Miss Spinelli to them?
I think yes and no.
Because you're pretty recognizable, Maggie.
And people would come up to me and say, I know you're in Batman. You know, things like that.
Right.
Little 5-year-olds.
Right.
My mom told me you're in Batman. You know, and so but children are able to hold
My mom told me you were in Batman.
two totally alternate realities in their mind at once. You know, at that age.
You know, we were talking a little bit about how people kind of imbue genius. I'm using my own words. You weren't talking about this, but they imbue a certain genius on children sometimes with the thoughts they come up in. You know, and I was thinking largely because I think we often look at children and think, oh, they haven't had to deal with all the shit we have to deal with. They haven't had their heart broken yet. You know, they haven't watched their parents fight yet. Maybe, you know, they haven't seen a lot of these things. Oh, if only those things hadn't gotten in the way. They haven't had student debt. They hadn't had all these things.
Right.
Maybe my true. And I'm guilty of that too, of thinking that.
Sure.
Because I was thinking, you having acted since you were a youngster.
Sort of. Really, really after college mostly.
Yeah, but you were in films when you were on your dad's films. I know
For
that.
a second. I just don't want to
No, you weren't Macaulay Culkin.
No. I was in school, you know.
Sure, but you were on, I don't know, you were on
I did
set.
a great rendition of Nurse Ratched in Wonderful Over the Cuckoo's Nest at 14. You should have seen it. It was really amazing.
I'm going to ask you to do it right now. That's what I'm going to do.
I can't do that.
I'm only joking. That's okay. Do you, as a adult now,
Yeah.
when you act alongside the co-star in The Kindergarten Teacher, is it Parker Spivak? Spivak?
Mm-hmm.
Parker Spivak. So he plays Jimmy Roy, this boy with a gift for poetry. 5 years old when he made the film.
Mm-hmm.
Really beautiful performance. Do you learn anything from that?
From him?
Yeah.
It's an interesting question. I felt, because I have a child exactly the same age as Parker, I felt really focused on protecting him from having to perform too much, from having to feel any of the feelings of having his boundaries crossed in the way that Jimmy does in the movie. I didn't want this little boy to have to go through the experience of what his character Jimmy goes through.
I never thought about that.
So
yeah.
instead, and I was really attuned to it because my child was 5. I knew every day what it meant to be 5. I knew how vulnerable. In a way that I can't even remember now because now my child's 6.
Yeah.
And it's hard to really remember. So mostly in terms of the acting with Parker, Sarah and I, either we would put the camera on him and try not to let him know or, just sort of capture moments of him just being 5, which is so beautiful.
Yeah.
Or it was super technical. You can't say to a 5-year-old, you need to find the place in you that's more angry.
Right.
That's a weird note for an adult too.
Sure, but it sounds like something some bad director might
Exactly.
say to you, right? Yeah.
Instead, you have to say, or what we decided to do, and I felt really strongly about this, was stand on that red X on the ground, look out the window, and we're rolling. Look out the window. Now look back at me. Now look back out the window. Now say, I don't want to go. And he'd say, I don't want to go. No, Parker, sing it like a song. I don't want to go. Until he was really repeating after us and doing something very, very technical and simple.
Yeah.
And then I think in terms of me acting with him, it's funny. It's like Lisa thinks she's having a relationship with Jimmy, but she's having a relationship with herself. And I think she's missing him. And so it was all right that I didn't have a deeply intimate relationship with this little boy. It was just really more about a conversation with myself. And which helped because, like I said, we made the movie in 23 days. There were times when, because little children can't work as long as adults,
right.
Where we would shoot a scene, we'd shoot his side of the scene, and then I'd do my side, and the gaffer would act off camera with me.
Really?
Yeah.
Right, because he can't have him working
Or the big, huge, grown-up first AD, lying on the ground being Parker for me. And in a way it was fine because in a way, like I said, she's having these conversations with herself.
Does this feel like a risky film to you? I mean, you have a child in a key role, very complex lead character that you don't really know whether you're rooting for, even when the film is over.
Right.
You're not entirely sure if you're rooting for her or not.
Yeah.
The whole thing's about poetry, Maggie. I mean, it's not.
It's
I know
not,
it's not. I know it's not.
But there is a lot of poetry. It's true.
Did this film feel like a risk at all when you were making it? Not a risk to
Yeah,
your
no,
career.
of
You know what I mean?
course, of course, of course. But like, why else are we doing it? You know, and when I sat in the audience in Sundance, and we're going to watch it tonight, it's on tonight. Um, I haven't seen it since Sundance, but I sat in the audience in Sundance and I felt this kind of wild effect that it has. I mean, you can imagine, like, people gasp and they laugh at strange things.
Right.
And I think it's saying something real about the state of the world for women at the moment. You keep looking so confused when I say that. I think, I'll elaborate.
I think it's a lot. It's me saying, "Huh?" or "Tell me more."
Yeah, no, I know.
Without
I'll
being the guy who
elaborate.
talks all the time.
I'll elaborate.
Sure.
I mean, this is a woman who is not fundamentally mentally ill. She's not crazy. But I think you're looking at someone who is driven crazy by the culture that she finds herself in. And I think for many women at the moment, if we're honest, I don't know that I could imagine doing the things that Lisa does. I mean, it's an allegory. She goes real far.
It's real extreme. I mean,
Real
again, we don't want to give away
extreme.
too much,
No,
but this
it's-
is not.
it's-
There's
it's
parts of
extreme.
this that are very not relatable.
No, well,
Yeah.
right. It's beyond normal behavior, of course. But up until a point, the ways in which she's out of control, confused, has no help, no one understands her, and I think is hungry for some kind of real interaction in the world, is something I really relate to. And I know because of what's the cultural conversation at the moment that half of, the people in the world, the women relate to it. I mean, basically, we made the movie last summer. Trump was elected. In New York, anyway, there was this kind of feeling of like deep radicalism mixed with malaise.
So there was protests. People were spray painting things on Trump's buildings.
Yeah.
There was eruptions of protests in the streets, and then there was also a certain amount of, well, that's it. That's what happens.
Well, no, there was a certain amount of, oh my God, look where we actually are.
Yeah.
This is not where we wished we were.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think what started off all of this and the Time's Up and everything, I believe, was Trump saying, you can grab women's pussies if you want to and you have enough power and they let you.
Mm-hmm.
And then there being no consequence for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, I was like, whoa, things are bad. And I looked at my life and I looked at the ways in which I'd accepted all sorts of things I couldn't believe I accepted. And I think that's sort of what it's about, but it's in the form of this thriller, of this kind of,
Maggie, does the Toronto Film Festival feel different this year? I mean, this is the first Toronto Film Festival since Me Too, and they had to. Not that they had to. They had a rally this year. There's been a greater conversation. They have phone numbers to call in people's bags. But as I mentioned, you've been acting since you were a zygote. I'm only joking. You have been going to film festivals for a long time, though.
Mm.
Does it feel any different to you?
Yeah, everything feels different to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do feel like there's real action in response to all of this. I think everything feels different. Movie sets feel different.
How?
Well, on The Deuce, for example, I just finished shooting about 2 weeks ago, so that's really the one I can speak to. We have an intimacy, what do we call her? An intimacy expert.
So I should be clear for people who haven't seen The Deuce.
The Deuce is
we had the creators on. We had the boys on.
Oh, cool.
And so it's a show. I mean, again, I don't want to give too much away, but it's kind of a show about sex work and how it led to a pornography industry in New York in the 1970s.
Exactly.
So obviously, there's a lot of intimacy.
Exactly.
In the
There's
show.
a lot of sex scenes.
Sorry, continue.
So there's, when you do a fight scene in a movie, there's always a stuntman there, and there's somebody who's just watching so carefully to make sure that everybody's bodies are protected and that everybody feels comfortable and that nobody is put in a position physically or mentally that they don't feel okay with. But so we decided to have the same position basically for sex scenes. so that somebody was there to be your point person in case physically or mentally or in any way you felt uncomfortable. For me, I'm a producer on that show.
Yeah.
I'm there every day. I have a great relationship with the people there. And if I felt uncomfortable with something, I would have no problem just telling them. But for a day player who's coming on and so happy to have the job and doesn't want to rock the boat, and I think it's kind of amazing to have someone call you the night before to say, I really am here on your side. This is what your contract says.
Yeah.
And if you want to change anything, you let us know and we'll change it.
Yeah.
And I'm here to support you. And, so that is just an example.
Well, you're right. If you want to, if I was an actor, I've never acted, but jump over that fence. I don't really feel comfortable jumping over that fence. I think I might get hurt. That's like a reasonable thing to say on set. But up until now, if you were in a sex scene, if you had to be intimate, and perhaps a really troubling sex scene, there was no. You're right. There was no option for you to go, I don't know.
Or what if, you're shooting the scene and you've agreed to do this, and then the director, who's a big fancy director who you really admire, comes over and says, we'd like you to take your shirt off and do the scene.
Right.
And you have no experience. And, so, these are the things we're trying to help with. Even little things like being wired for sound. In a movie, you have to hide the microphone. So for a woman, and I think for men too, it's almost always like up your shirt.
Yeah, it's up to the bottom button of your shirt, kind of tacked to the top.
Well, maybe
for a
radio,
lav,
but if it's a
you're right.
If it's a movie, you have to hide it. So for a woman, it's almost always in the inside of your bra.
Okay.
Or on your skin, really between your breasts.
Yeah.
And forever, because everyone's in a rush and everyone's focused on making the day and getting what they need. Everyone's just like, can we just wire you here? Is that all right? And you do it.
So you strip down?
No, you don't strip down. You sort of like go in a corner and and we said, because of course for me, if I felt uncomfortable, again, I feel comfortable at this point saying, no, I'd love to do it in my trailer. Do you mind? I just would like to have the privacy.
Right.
But someone who's coming in, they want to please everyone. They've one day of work.
Right.
They want to be cool.
Right.
Maybe they don't want to pull their shirt up in front of everybody. So we've changed.
But they don't really know how to. They don't really know how to say
it.
that.
I mean, I so relate to that. I totally understand. So those are two little tiny examples, but there are hundreds of them that I've noticed since all of this has become explicit, of ways that we're trying to take care of each other.
I want to close off with a question about sort of everything, all of the roles you've ever played at once.
Okay, go for it.
Can you name them? No, that's not the question. So
I could name the good ones. I definitely disassociated the other ones.
all the bad ones have just left.
Can't remember their names.
Yeah. So you're one of the producers of The Kindergarten Teacher. You're also one of the producers on The Deuce. But again. I'm wondering if you see any connection between the characters that you've played, or maybe a bit more clearly. Is there something that a character needs to have for you to want to do it?
I think there has to be, I have to be in the territory somehow of what's on the edge of what I know about myself. So somehow the character has to provide me an opportunity to explore something that's interesting me right now about my own mind and my mind in relation to the world that I'm in.
Can you give me an example?
Yeah.
I'm thinking like Batman or The Deuce, or I'm thinking this film.
Yeah, well, so this film, I think, has, and The Deuce is similar. And in fact, I made the first season of The Deuce, then I made The Kindergarten Teacher, then I made the second season of The Deuce. So they're melded in together. I mean, and it's interesting because, of course, it's porn director to kindergarten teacher. In a way, you couldn't get more different. But they are both women who are coming to terms with or becoming aware of the ways in which they're not satisfied, the ways in which they're starving, the ways in which that hunger is life or death. And I relate to that. And, Candy and The Deuce, it's interesting because, of course, it's easy, I guess, in a very simple way to judge her. She makes porn. She's
Yeah.
both on and off off camera. But she has her eye on what she needs, and she is clear, and she is inch by inch, against all odds, moving her way toward something triumphant. And she gets knocked down all the time, as you do. And especially as you do if you're a sex worker in 1971 or a porn director in 1977, you do. And she's cool, she gets up, it hurts, and she moves on. Lisa, in The Kindergarten Teacher, has a similar need, and yet she just goes down the wrong path. And it was very hard to do that, very hard to be on that wrong path and walk down that wrong path and live walking down that confused wrong path for the 23 days that we had to do it. But I relate to that too.
How?
How did she go down the wrong path?
How do you relate to it?
How do I relate to it? Well, I've been confused and lost and walked down the wrong path and made decisions that were hurtful to me or to other people, just like we all have. Not to the degree that Lisa has.
Sure.
But I think it's important to me to let people know and to let myself know, that's okay too. And by the very end of the movie, Lisa can see that.
Maggie Gyllenhaal's been so nice.
Thanks.
I'd like talking to you.
Yeah, you too.